Imagine boarding a flight, ticket in hand, heart racing with excitement. Now imagine being told you don't belong before you even buckle your seatbelt. That is exactly what happened to 12-year-old Noah Ellington. A woman looked at him, judged him by the color of his skin, and demanded he move from the seat that was rightfully his. What she didn't know was that the quiet boy in seat 2A carried a last name that would change everything. His father, Malcolm Ellington, was not only a protective parent, he was the man who owned the airline itself. But here's the question: does dignity depend on power, or should it be given freely to every human being? What happens when arrogance collides with truth at 30,000 feet, and how can a single confrontation on a plane spark a nationwide reckoning about respect, justice, and belonging? This is not just a story about one flight. It is about all of us. So, before we begin, take a moment to like this video, share it with those who care about justice, and subscribe to the channel. Because once you hear what unfolded on that flight, you won't see air travel or human dignity the same way again. The hum of engines vibrated gently through the cabin of Flight 827, a steady reminder that soon 200 souls would be lifted into the sky. First class was already filling with the quiet shuffle of briefcases, the clink of champagne glasses, and the muted conversations of travelers who expected comfort at 35,000 feet. Noah Ellington sat in seat 2A, his small hand smoothing the edges of his navy blazer as if it were armor. At just 12 years old, he looked out the window with wide eyes that carried a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The city lights glittered far below, and beyond the glass stretched a horizon he longed to explore. His father had told him this was his reward: straight A's, months of studying, late nights spent over math problems and essays. The prize was this: a first-class seat, a trip with memories waiting to be made, a moment of dignity that said, "You've earned this." The boy's boarding pass was tucked carefully in his breast pocket, his name and seat number printed in crisp letters: Noah Ellington, seat 2A, first class. He touched it every few minutes, just to remind himself it was real. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, this is my seat. You need to move." The words cut the air like a blade. They came from a woman standing over him, her posture sharp, her eyes narrowed. She was tall, blonde, every detail of her appearance screaming entitlement. Her designer coat shimmered under the cabin lights, her handbag an obvious declaration of wealth. Catherine Voss looked at Noah as though he were an intruder who had dared step across an invisible line. Noah blinked up at her, his lips parting slightly. He had expected kindness, or at least indifference. He had not expected this. His fingers brushed the boarding pass again before he lifted it with trembling hands. "Ma'am, this is my seat. It says 2A. His voice was soft, but steady. Catherine leaned closer, plucked the paper from his hands with casual cruelty, and glanced at it. 1 second, 2 at most. Then she tossed it back like it was contaminated. "Mistakes happen, sweetheart. Someone must have felt sorry for you and upgraded you by accident. This is first class. You belong in the back." The words hit him harder than turbulence ever could. They carried centuries of exclusion in 4 syllables: where you belong. Around them, passengers stirred. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A businessman lowered his laptop. A grandmother stilled her crossword pencil. A doctor adjusted her conference notes. The energy shifted, like the thick air before a storm. Phones slipped discreetly from pockets, cameras poised as people realized they were about to witness something that would not remain within these walls. Noah sat frozen. His brown eyes reflected both confusion and hurt, but behind them was something else, a spark, a quiet dignity far too deep for his years. "Ma'am," he said again, clutching the pass like a shield. "My dad bought this ticket for me. I belong here." Catherine laughed. It was not the laugh of humor, but of scorn. Sharp, and cutting. She lowered herself into 2A with theatrical flair, spreading her belongings across the armrests as if staking a claim. "Listen, honey," she continued, her tone syrupy with mock kindness. "I fly first class every week. I know how this works. Someone made a mistake. The attendants will fix it once they see." She leaned back, satisfied, her perfume wafting through the space like a territorial marker. Noah stood in the aisle, his boarding pass pressed against his chest, his shoulders trembling. 3 rows back, Malcolm Ellington watched. His dark eyes never wavered, though his jaw tightened. A titan of industry, a man whose company owned the very airline carrying them through the clouds. Malcolm had chosen to sit separately. He wanted his son to taste independence, to learn the rhythms of the world on his own. But now, every instinct as a father warred with the discipline of a leader. When do you step in? When do you let your child learn to stand? Even as cruelty bears down, the cabin seemed to lean in with him, waiting. Near seat 3B, Evelyn Monroe, a silver-haired grandmother with lines carved by years of struggle, set her crossword down. She had marched decades earlier beside Dr. King, her hands gripping protest signs, her voice hoarse from chanting for rights many took for granted now. She recognized the sound of discrimination instantly. Her stomach clenched, her memories flooding back separate water fountains, segregated buses, indignities endured for no reason but skin. She whispered under her breath, "Not again. Not this boy." In seat 1C, Victor Leon closed his laptop. The charts on his screen dissolved into irrelevance as he turned his focus to the unfolding storm. An Asian American executive who had clawed his way up ladders slick with prejudice. Victor understood exactly what he was seeing. It was not about a seat. It was about belonging. It was about dignity, his jaw set with silent fury. By the window, Dr. Samira Kadir shifted forward. Years of pediatric surgery had trained her to detect suffering in children, the subtle signs others missed. She saw it in Noah's eyes, the fight to remain composed, the cost of holding back tears. Her hands gripped her conference folder, protective instincts rising, and yet Catherine remained oblivious. She thought herself the hero of her own story. She mistook the cameras for support, mistook silence for agreement. Her voice carried louder now, bolstered by what she believed was authority. "Look at him," she scoffed. "A mistake. A charity case. First class isn't for this." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the air seemed heavier, poisoned by her words. Noah inhaled deeply, as if summoning strength from generations before him. His voice, when it came, was quiet but steady, the kind of calm that pierces louder than anger. "I belong in this seat because my father paid for it, and because I'm a person who deserves respect, just like you." Catherine's laugh rang again, brittle, sharp. "Respect, sweetheart. Respect is earned, and your place isn't here. Your place is in the back." From his seat in 5A, Malcolm Ellington's hand flexed against the armrest. The moment of decision loomed. How much should he allow his son to bear? At what point did teaching become neglect, and dignity demand intervention? The storm was building, and Catherine Voss had no idea that the man who would soon rise to defend his son was not just a father. He was the owner of the very skies she believed belonged to her. The hum of the cabin had shifted. It was no longer the easy, muffled chatter of first-class passengers waiting for departure. Now it was a low thrum of unease, the kind of silence that grows teeth. Every pair of eyes seemed drawn to row 2, to the slender boy standing his ground and the woman occupying his stolen seat. Noah Ellington's heart thudded against his ribcage. He had never been in a fight, not the kind that leaves bruises on the skin. But this felt like a different kind of battle, one where bruises would settle deeper, in places invisible. His hands tightened around the boarding pass. He thought of the hours he had spent at his desk, the nights his father peeked in to see him bent over books, the promise that hard work had value. Now that promise was being tested, mocked by the sneer on Catherine Voss's lips. "Flight attendant," Catherine called out, her voice carrying the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Over here. Please, let's fix this little mistake before takeoff." From the galley. Sofia Alvarez straightened. 15 years in the sky had taught her how quickly calm could turn to chaos. She had soothed crying infants, broken up shouting matches, and even once talked down a passenger in the middle of a panic attack. But something about this moment felt different. The tension wasn't about luggage space or meal service. It was about something older, uglier, rooted in wounds that never seemed to heal. She approached with her practiced smile, the one meant to disarm conflict before it exploded. "Good afternoon. I'm Sophia, and I'll be taking care of first class today. Is everything all right here?" Catherine seized the opportunity like a lion spotting prey. "Finally. Yes, there's a problem. This boy is sitting in my seat. Clearly some mistake with his ticket. I always fly first class. Always. So if you'll just check, we can get him moved where he belongs." Her words carried that last edge of poison. Where he belongs, but she dressed them in politeness as if that softened the cruelty. Noah looked at Sophia with pleading eyes, but his voice held steady. "Ma'am, this is my boarding pass. Seat 2A. My father bought it for me because I earned it. I belong here." He handed her the slip. Sophia examined it carefully, her professional training running like clockwork. Seat 2A, paid in full, no upgrades, no codes, legitimate in every way. She looked at Catherine with calm firmness. "Ma'am, this ticket is valid. Seat 2A belongs to Noah Ellington." Catherine blinked, then recovered with practiced indignation. She dug into her oversized purse, pulling out her own boarding pass with a flourish. "See here, first class, right where I always sit." Sophia studied the slip. Row 23, middle seat, economy. The contrast was almost laughable, if it weren't so toxic. She inhaled slowly, choosing words like a surgeon with a scalpel. "Ma'am, your assigned seat is in economy class, 23B. There's been no mistake. This young man is in the correct seat." For a fraction of a second, something like doubt flickered across Catherine's face. But then it hardened, the way people double down when pride outweighs truth. Her voice rose, filling the cabin. "That's impossible. I have platinum status. I've flown this airline for years. I don't care what your computer says. This child cannot possibly have a legitimate first-class ticket." The words echoed, ugly and raw. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, their sympathy for Catherine evaporating with every syllable. Evelyn Monroe, seated in 3B, closed her crossword with a snap. Her voice, aged but steady, rang out. "Young lady, that boy has every right to be here. His ticket proves it. And your behavior is disgraceful." Victor Liang leaned forward, his calm executive voice carrying weight. "You're creating a hostile environment for a minor passenger. This isn't about status. It's harassment. It needs to stop. Doctor." Samira Kadir raised her phone, the red record light glowing. "This is unacceptable. I'm documenting everything. You are traumatizing a child for no reason other than your prejudice." Catherine turned, scanning the cabin, and realized the eyes staring back were not allies, but witnesses. Still, she clung to her script. "Look, I don't want to make this about race, but let's be realistic. These tickets cost thousands of dollars. Do you honestly think his family can afford this?" She gestured at Noah dismissively. "I'm not trying to be mean, but mistakes happen. And I'm not giving up my seat because of some diversity initiative. The gasp that followed was audible. Even the engines seemed quieter. Noah felt the sting of her words cut deep, but something inside him straightened, braced. He remembered his father's lessons. Dignity is not given by others, it is carried within. He drew a breath. My father works hard. He built his company from nothing. He bought this seat for me because he wanted me to know I deserve to be treated with respect. I'm not in anyone's way. I'm not taking something that doesn't belong to me. I'm just sitting in the seat my family paid for. The calmness of his words sliced through the venom like light through fog. Passengers exchanged looks of admiration, whispers rippling. Evelyn Monroe dabbed at her eyes. Victor Liang nodded with silent respect, but Catherine only grew louder. Sweetheart, I'm sure your dad is a nice man, but this is about more than money. First class is for business people, professionals, people who matter. You'll understand when you're older. You're not appropriate for this section. Appropriate. The word landed like a slap. Even Sofia Alvarez felt her stomach twist at the sheer brazenness. She opened her mouth to intervene again, but the cabin had reached a tipping point. No, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but fierce. This ends now. That child belongs exactly where he is. Yes, Victor added, leaning into the aisle. If this continues, I'll be filing a formal complaint. This is harassment. Samira's voice rose with the clipped authority of someone who saved lives daily. I am a mandated reporter. This will not go undocumented. The tide had shifted. Catherine was isolated, surrounded not by silent complicity, but open resistance. Yet her pride chained her. She straightened, her face flushed. I want to speak to someone in charge. Get me the captain. Get me the manager. Get me whoever runs this airline. The demand rang out, sharp as a whip crack. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, 3 rows back, Malcolm Ellington exhaled slowly and closed his laptop. He had waited, watched, measured. He had hoped his son could stand tall without him, and Noah had. But the moment Catherine demanded authority, she unknowingly summoned exactly what she feared most. Malcolm rose. His 6'2" frame carried not arrogance but calm presence, the kind that drew attention without effort. His navy suit whispered elegance, his movements unhurried, deliberate. He stepped into the aisle, every head turning as if gravity itself shifted with him. Noah's eyes lit with relief. His father's hand found his shoulder, firm and grounding. Everything all right? Son Malcolm asked softly. Though he already knew every word that had been said, Noah straightened. Dad, she says I don't belong here. She says there was a mistake. Malcolm's gaze moved to Catherine. It was not anger. Anger was too small for what filled him. It was disappointment, the kind that makes grown men shrink. He spoke evenly, each word carrying quiet authority. Ma'am, this is my son. Those are our seats. I'd appreciate it if you moved to your assigned location. But Catherine Voss was not ready to surrender. Not yet. She smirked, clinging to the only script she knew. Oh, so Daddy shows up. How convenient. I don't care if you bought these tickets or won them in a lottery. First class is for people who matter. And you don't. The cabin froze. Passengers felt the air shift, the storm breaking open. Catherine had no idea who she had just challenged, and Malcolm Ellington, owner of the very airline carrying them, was about to show her what true authority looked like. The aisle of Flight 827 had become a stage. Every row a theater seat, every passenger an audience member holding their breath. The drama unfolding in the first-class cabin no longer felt like a simple seating dispute. It had become something larger, a collision of dignity, prejudice, and power. And now, Malcolm Ellington stood at the center of it, At 6'2", dressed in a tailored navy suit and polished shoes, Malcolm radiated calm authority. He did not need to raise his voice or pound his chest. His presence was enough to still the whispers. He placed one steady hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture small but powerful. For Noah, it was like the world righted itself in that moment. The trembling in his chest eased. His father was here. Everything all right. Son Malcolm's voice was low, carrying warmth for Noah, but also a subtle steel that reverberated through the cabin. Noah lifted his chin. His voice came out steady, even though his heart still pounded. "Dad, she says I don't belong here. She says my ticket is a mistake." Malcolm's gaze shifted to Catherine Voss. She sat in the seat meant for his son, her body language sharp with defiance. Her eyes narrowed as she met his look. For a brief second, something uncertain flickered there, but she quickly smothered it beneath layers of practiced arrogance. "Oh, so Daddy shows up," Catherine sneered, her tone dripping with condescension. "How convenient. Let me guess you think flashing a credit card or making a few calls is going to change the rules. I don't care how much money you spent. First class is for people who matter." Her words landed like stones dropped in still water, sending ripples through the entire cabin. Evelyn Monroe gasped audibly, her hand pressing against her chest. Victor Liang leaned forward, his lips tightening into a thin line. "Doctor." Samira Kadir shook her head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of her face. Malcolm remained unmoved. His calm was unnerving, the kind of calm that comes not from weakness, but from absolute certainty in one's power. He had faced boardrooms filled with adversaries, hostile takeovers designed to break him, media storms meant to destroy his reputation. Yet none of those battles had cut him as deeply as this one. This wasn't about shares or profits. This was about his son, about the right of a child to sit in a seat he had earned. "Ma'am," Malcolm said evenly, "this is not a debate. That seat belongs to my son. I need you to move to your assigned place so we can continue with our day." Catherine laughed, though the sound cracked slightly at the edges. "Or what you'll call a lawyer. Write a complaint on social media. Please, I've been flying first class for 20 years. I know how this works. He doesn't belong here, and neither do you." The gasp that followed was louder this time, more like a wave than a ripple. The passengers were no longer passive witnesses. They were leaning in, invested, their emotions written across their faces: disgust, outrage, sympathy for the boy and his father. Malcolm's hand remained steady on Noah's shoulder. His other hand slipped into his jacket pocket, pulling out a sleek company phone. The small gesture sent a ripple through the few passengers already searching his name on their own devices. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. "That's Malcolm Ellington," someone whispered from row 1. "He's on the Forbes list." "The Airline? Doesn't he own it?" another voice murmured from across the aisle. "Yes," Dr. Kadir confirmed quietly, showing her screen to her neighbor. "He's the CEO. Ellington Air Group. They own this airline." The realization moved through the cabin like electricity, faces lighting up with sudden comprehension. A woman who had belittled a boy for not belonging was sitting inches from the man who not only belonged more than anyone else on the plane, but who quite literally owned the skies she was trying to claim. But Catherine remained in the dark. She mistook the whispers for support, the recording phones for validation. She leaned back, her smirk widening. "See, everyone agrees this is ridiculous. You're making a scene for no reason. Admit it, you don't belong here." Malcolm dialed a number, his voice calm when the call connected. "This is Ellington. I need to be patched through to the captain immediately. We have a passenger issue in first class, seat 2A. Catherine blinked, a flicker of confusion breaking through her facade. The way he spoke like a man used to giving orders, not requests, did not match her assumptions. She straightened, watching him carefully now, but pride forced her to keep pressing. Calling your little connections won't change anything. Rules are rules. Noah looked up at his father, a mix of awe and relief softening his features. For him, this was more than vindication. It was a reminder of what his father had always taught him. True strength does not need to shout. Within moments, the cabin door opened. Captain Marcus Leone stepped in, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers. His presence alone carried authority, the kind that silences arguments before they start. But when his eyes found Malcolm Ellington, his expression shifted. Respect filled his features. "Mr. Ellington," the captain said clearly, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, "I apologize for the disturbance. We'll resolve this immediately." Catherine's head snapped around. "Mr. Ellington," she repeated, her voice rising with confusion. "Why are you talking to him like that?" The captain's tone held the weight of finality. "Because he is the CEO and majority owner of Ellington Air Group, the parent company of this airline. This is his aircraft, and that is his son's seat." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just the hush of shock. It was the silence of a world tilting, of certainty shattering. Catherine's smirk dissolved. Color drained from her face. The phone's recording captured every second, every twitch of realization dawning on her features. "No, that's not possible," she whispered, her voice cracking. How was I supposed to know? Malcolm's gaze did not waver. His disappointment was sharper than any anger could have been. "You weren't supposed to know. You were supposed to treat my son with basic respect. You failed." The words landed with devastating precision. Catherine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Around her, passengers exchanged glances filled with satisfaction. Evelyn Monroe's eyes glistened with tears. Victor Liang let out a quiet breath of vindication. Dr. Kadir kept her phone steady, capturing the perfect moment when arrogance collapsed under truth. The security officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, please gather your belongings. You'll need to move to your assigned seat in economy. There will also be a report filed regarding your behavior." Catherine scrambled, her hands shaking as she clutched her designer bag. She muttered protests. "This isn't fair. I didn't know." Anyone could claim to be him, but they sounded hollow, stripped of conviction. She rose reluctantly, aware of the dozens of lenses documenting her humiliation. Her walk down the aisle toward row 23 would soon become the stuff of viral infamy. Noah sank back into 2A, finally where he belonged. Malcolm sat beside him, his presence a shield, his pride evident in the way he looked at his son. "You did well," he whispered. "You stood your ground. I'm proud of you." The cabin erupted in applause. It started with Evelyn Monroe, then spread like wildfire. Soon the entire first-class section was clapping, not just for the victory of justice, but for the dignity of a boy who had carried himself with grace under fire, and for a father who had shown the world that true authority does not need to roar. But as the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Malcolm knew this was not the end. Phones were uploading the footage. The internet would soon feast on Catherine's downfall, but it would also amplify Noah's courage. This was more than a confrontation on a plane. It was a story of dignity, prejudice, and power colliding in full view of the world. And for Catherine Voss, the consequences were only beginning. The tension that had held the cabin in its grip finally cracked. Catherine Voss stood frozen, her hand clutching the strap of her designer bag as if it were the last defense against a world suddenly turned hostile. Her face was pale, her carefully applied lipstick trembling at the corners of her mouth. The words of the captain still hung in the air like thunder after a lightning strike. "This is his aircraft. And that is his son's seat. Noah eased back into seat 2A, the leather cool against his shoulders. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The applause still echoed faintly, fading into murmurs and rustles as people adjusted themselves again, but the energy in the cabin had transformed. What had been tense silence was now a shared relief, an unspoken acknowledgement that justice had been done. Catherine, however, did not move. She lingered in the aisle as though frozen between choices to fight again and risk deeper humiliation, or to obey and accept the shame she had brought upon herself. Her pride, that armor she had polished for decades, was cracked. "Ma'am," one of the security officers said, gently but firmly, "we need to proceed. Please gather your things." She bent slowly, pulling her silk scarf from the seat, her movements jerky, uncoordinated. For years, she had walked with the certainty of someone who believed the world would always bend around her. Now every gesture betrayed how fragile that certainty truly was. She muttered under her breath, fragments of excuses no one cared to hear. Misunderstanding, status, didn't know. When she finally stepped into the aisle, the silence that followed was louder than the applause had been. Every phone camera followed her. Dozens of eyes marked her every step. The polished heels that had once carried her with confidence now struck the floor with heavy, dragging beats. Evelyn Monroe's voice cut through the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, honed by years of speaking truth to power. "Remember this moment. You tried to strip a child of his dignity, and it backfired." Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat worked as though swallowing glass. As she moved down the aisle toward the curtain separating first class from economy, Noah watched her, not with gloating or hatred, but with something softer. A strange sadness filled him. He was too young to understand all the forces that shaped her arrogance. But he understood this much cruelty had consumed her, and in the end, it had destroyed her. He wondered, briefly, what it must feel like to live inside a heart so hollow. Malcolm sat beside him now, his hand resting lightly on his son's knee. He felt Noah's chest rise and fall, the boy's steadying breath. Malcolm knew his son had passed through fire today. Not all scars were visible, but Noah had not crumbled. He had held his ground, spoken with dignity, and faced down contempt that would have broken even grown men. "You did well, son," Malcolm murmured. "Better than I could have imagined. I'm proud of you." Noah turned, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, was it always like this for you?" The question pierced deeper than any insult Catherine had thrown. Malcolm's eyes closed for a moment, memories flooding boardrooms where his words were dismissed until repeated by someone else. Dinners where he was mistaken for the help. Investors who had smiled politely while doubting his every move. He had carried those battles quietly, shouldering them so his son might never know. But the world had reminded them both today that progress was fragile. "Too often," Malcolm admitted softly. "But you showed them something different. You showed them you belong without needing to prove it." Noah nodded, though the weight of the moment was still settling in his chest. The sound of Catherine moving through the cabin drew their attention again. As she crossed into economy, the contrast was stark. In first class, passengers had confronted her openly. In economy, whispers rose like a tide, passengers craning their necks, recognizing her from moments ago. Screens lit up as videos spread faster than wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags would sprout, clips would circulate, and Catherine Voss's name would become synonymous with arrogance undone. She tried to sit tall in her cramped middle seat, clutching her bag as though it could shield her from the digital storm already forming. But there was no hiding from it. She was not the victim she imagined herself to be. She was the villain in a story the entire plane had witnessed, and soon the world would too. Back in first class, the energy began to soften. Passengers spoke in low tones, some praising Noah, others marveling at Malcolm's calm authority. Evelyn leaned across the aisle, her voice warm as she addressed Noah. "Young man, I've lived through decades of struggle. I've seen marches, protests, and heartbreak, and today I saw something I'll never forget. You stood tall with dignity when someone tried to make you small. Never forget that strength. It will carry you further than any seat on any plane." Noah's cheeks flushed, and he ducked his head. "Thank you, ma'am." Victor Liang joined in, his words measured but sincere. "What you did wasn't easy, but you handled it better than most executives I've seen in a boardroom. That composure will take you far. And your father is right. You belong wherever you choose to be." Dr. Samira Kadir, still holding her phone, smiled softly. "You reminded everyone here what respect looks like. I hope the world sees this and learns from it." Noah listened, his young heart swelling with gratitude, but also with a quiet fear. He had not asked to be a symbol. He had only wanted to fly with his father, to sit in the seat his family had bought. Yet life had chosen otherwise. Malcolm noticed the shadow in his son's eyes. He bent closer, his voice low. "You don't have to carry the weight of the world, Noah. Today you carried yourself. That's enough." Noah nodded, comforted by the words. Still, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had seen how fast the cameras had captured everything. Would his schoolmates see? Would strangers know his name? Would Catherine Voss fade into obscurity while he became the boy at the center of a viral storm? Malcolm's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He ignored it. There would be time for corporate fallout, for press releases, for strategic meetings with his communications team, but not now. Right now. He was just a father sitting beside his son, watching the lights on the runway begin to blur as the aircraft prepared to take off. As the plane lifted into the night sky, Noah looked out the window, the city shrinking beneath them. For the first time since the confrontation began, he allowed himself to smile. It wasn't triumph. Not really. It was relief. Relief that he had not broken. Relief that his father was proud. Relief that strangers had stood up when it mattered. But beneath that relief was something else. Something heavier. A question that settled deep in his chest. If this could happen to me in front of all these people, what happens to those who don't have cameras watching? Who defends them? The question lingered as the stars emerged in the night sky, silent witnesses to everything that had just unfolded. At 35,000 feet, the world below disappeared into clouds, but inside Flight 827, the world was closing in on Catherine Voss. She sat stiffly in her economy seat, arms crossed, lips tight, aware of the dozens of phones still angled toward her, capturing every twitch of her expression. She tried to hide behind her glossy handbag, but there was no hiding now. Up in first class, the mood was shifting. The initial tension had given way to a hum of conversation. Passengers leaned toward each other, whispering, replaying the confrontation in vivid detail. Clips were already bouncing from phone to phone. Some had uploaded footage to social media. Others were live streaming. The glow of screens lit the cabin like a constellation of judgment. Noah sat quietly, staring out the window again. The stars twinkled faintly, indifferent to what had just happened. He pressed his cheek against the cool glass, trying to block out the voices behind him. Compliments, praise, admiration. It should have made him feel proud. Instead, it only deepened his unease. He hadn't wanted to be a spectacle. He hadn't wanted his dignity to become entertainment. Malcolm noticed. He had spent his life reading boardrooms, investors, hostile competitors. He could read his son just as clearly. Noah's silence wasn't the calm of victory, it was the weight of exposure. "Talk to me," Malcolm said softly. Noah shrugged. "Everyone's staring. It doesn't feel like I won. It feels like I'm just a story they'll tell later." Malcolm nodded, his chest tightening. "That's because the world turns pain into headlines. But remember this, Noah. What matters isn't their story, it's yours. You stood your ground with dignity. That's not for them, that's for you." Noah absorbed the words, but the knot in his chest remained. He closed his eyes, replaying Catherine's sneer, her words like barbs. "Not appropriate. Doesn't belong." The echo clung stubbornly. 2 rows ahead, Evelyn Monroe leaned back slightly, catching Malcolm's eye. She mouthed a silent thank you, then turned to Noah with a gentle smile. "You remind me of my grandson," she said softly. "He's your age. He's learning that the world isn't always kind. But you tonight, you showed him and me that kindness can stand firm. That matters, young man." Victor Liang joined in, his voice low, analytical. "The internet is already lighting up. People are tagging the airline, demanding accountability. This story will be bigger than just one rude passenger. It's going to spark something larger." "Doctor," Samira Qadir lowered her phone, finally ending her recording. She placed a hand over Noah's arm gently. "Sometimes the hardest lessons come early. But you gave people here the courage to speak. Don't underestimate that." Noah gave a small nod, though his gaze remained on the stars. "In economy." Catherine shifted uncomfortably as murmurs rippled around her. A man across the aisle was replaying the confrontation on his phone, shaking his head. A teenager 2 rows back was typing furiously, no doubt uploading the video to TikTok or Twitter. Catherine's name was already trending. She could feel it, the invisible flood building against her. She pulled her scarf tighter, as though fabric could muffle shame. Meanwhile, Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at it. Dozens of notifications, mentions climbing. His communications director had already sent 3 messages. "We need to prepare a statement. Media already asking for comment. Viral traction accelerating." He silenced the device. There would be time for that later, but a part of him knew this was no longer just a personal confrontation. It was becoming a corporate crisis. His son's dignity had been defended, yes, but the incident would now shine a spotlight on Ellington Air itself. How the company responded would matter, not just for optics, but for policy, for the systemic issues the encounter had dragged into daylight. Sophia Alvarez returned to check on Noah, kneeling slightly so her voice carried only to him. "Are you comfortable now, sweetheart? Can I get you something to drink?" Noah hesitated, then whispered, "Water. Please." His throat was dry, but more than that, he wanted something simple, grounding. Sophia handed him a chilled bottle with a small smile. "You're stronger than most adults I've met up here. Don't forget that." Malcolm thanked her quietly. He could see in her eyes the same mix of pride and sorrow that filled his own. Everyone recognized the ugliness of what had happened. Everyone wished it hadn't needed to be proven at all. The plane droned steadily onward, its nose cutting through the dark sky. In first class, conversations grew louder. Passengers speculated about what would happen next. Would the woman be banned from flying? Would the airline issue a statement? A man in 1A declared, "This is the kind of thing that makes people lose faith in travel. You can pay thousands of dollars and still get treated like you don't belong if you don't look the part." Victor Liang nodded. Exactly. This wasn't about a seat. It was about perception. Who belongs where? That's the poison that has to be dealt with. Noah listened, his small fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of the window. He wondered if the world would ever stop asking who belonged where. Malcolm leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. He thought of his own father, a janitor who had worked nights so his family could afford a tiny apartment. His father had told him once, "They'll always question if you belong. Don't waste your life answering them. Just build so big they can't ignore you." Those words had carried Malcolm through college, through rejection, through the brutal climb of entrepreneurship. Tonight, they echoed again, but this time for Noah. "Dad," Noah whispered, "if you weren't the owner, would they have believed me?" The question landed like a blow. Malcolm opened his eyes slowly, his chest heavy. "Maybe not. Maybe they would have kept doubting you. But that's why we fight, Noah. So one day, you won't need a name or a title for people to respect you." Noah's throat tightened. He nodded, though he didn't fully believe it yet. Behind the curtain. Catherine tried to steady her breathing. She imagined the moment she landed, the calls she'd have to answer, the headlines waiting. She pictured her colleagues, her neighbors, even her family scrolling through footage of her humiliation. Shame pressed in from every side, yet still her pride whispered excuses. "They twisted my words. They provoked me. I'm the victim." But the hollow sound of those thoughts couldn't drown out the truth she had lived. Her prejudice had been laid bare, and the world had seen. The cabin lights dimmed as the crew prepared for meal service. Trays rattled softly, silverware clinking, but the energy remained charged. Everyone knew they were suspended in a story that was still unfolding. The boy in seat 2A was no longer just a passenger. He was becoming a symbol. Malcolm watched his son's profile, the way Noah's eyes reflected both pride and unease. He realized the journey ahead would not just be measured in miles, but in lessons. Lessons about dignity, about carrying the weight of expectation, about how the world saw them and how they would choose to respond. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and endless. Inside, the cabin felt like a crucible, forging something that could not be undone. Catherine Voss sat wedged in seat 23B. The middle seat she had tried so hard to avoid, her body tense against the armrests that boxed her in. The businessman to her left was already dozing, his snores cutting like a saw through the cabin's white noise. To her right, a college student in headphones typed furiously on a laptop, oblivious to her mounting dread. Catherine's expensive scarf itched against her skin. She tugged at it, but it felt more like a noose than comfort. Everywhere around her, screens glowed. She caught glimpses of herself on strangers' phones, the arch of her brow, the sneer on her lips, her words replayed in crystal clarity. Each clip seemed to multiply. The teenager 2 rows back whispered to a friend, "It's already on TikTok, 200,000 views and climbing." Catherine's heart stuttered, her face, her voice, her arrogance all becoming digital evidence of her undoing. She tried to hold her chin high, but her thoughts spiraled. What would her boss say when the video hit the office group chat? Would her clients see? What about her sister, who already accused her of being too entitled, too judgmental? For years, Catherine had crafted an image of polish and prestige, carefully curating her online presence to project success. Now, in less than an hour, that facade was unraveling. Back in first class, the atmosphere was shifting from tension to quiet reflection. Noah sat in 2A, the seat that had been his all along, his boarding pass tucked carefully into the seat pocket as if to prove it again if needed. He sipped from his water bottle in small gulps, though his throat still ached from holding back tears. The kindness of passengers around him had been overwhelming, but part of him couldn't shake the thought that he hadn't really been defended. His father's identity had Malcolm noticed. His son's silence carried weight. He leaned closer. "You're awfully quiet," he murmured. Noah shrugged. "Everyone's saying I was brave, but it feels like they only cared once they knew who you were." The words pierced Malcolm. He had asked himself the same question in the minutes since Captain Leone had addressed him as Mr. Ellington in front of the cabin. Would passengers have risen to Noah's defense if his father hadn't been the man who owned Ellington Air? Would their outrage have been as loud, or had his identity flipped the narrative from pity to reverence? "You're right to ask that," Malcolm said carefully. "And the truth is, maybe some wouldn't have, but you stood your ground before anyone knew. That's the part that matters. The cameras caught you holding on to your dignity long before they caught me stepping forward." Noah listened, still uncertain, but his father's words settled into him like slow rain on dry soil. Evelyn Monroe leaned forward from her seat. Her voice carried the weight of decades. "Young man, don't underestimate what you did. I marched with Dr. King when I was not much older than you. I know what it looks like when dignity stands in the face of cruelty. You did that today. The world may remember your father's name, but I will remember yours." Noah gave a small nod, his lips tightening in a shy, grateful smile. For the first time since Catherine's outburst, he felt seen for himself, not just as his father's son. Meanwhile, Dr. Samira Kadir uploaded her recording to a private folder, already thinking of how she might use it as a teaching tool. She glanced at Victor Liang, who was scrolling through his own phone. "It's trending already, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Victor nodded. "Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The tags are blowing up. First-class racism. Seat 2A. Ellington Air. By the time we land, this won't just be a story, it'll be a storm." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. He could feel the weight of it. The story wasn't just about Noah anymore. It was about the airline, about him, about the question of who belonged in spaces of privilege. And in the age of viral media, there was no controlling the narrative, only responding to it. In economy, Catherine's spiral deepened. She overheard whispers. "That's her," a woman murmured, tilting her phone screen for her seatmate, the one who tried to steal the kid's seat. Catherine's cheeks burned. She hunched lower, as if shrinking would make her invisible. The businessman beside her stirred, glanced at her briefly, then turned away, pulling his arm tighter against his side as though to avoid contact. Even the smallest gestures now felt like rejection. She told herself she hadn't meant harm, that she had only defended what she thought was hers. But the words she had spat appropriate. "Doesn't belong," charity case echoed in her head with a venom she couldn't excuse. Maybe she had gone too far. Maybe they were right. But the stubborn voice inside her still whispered, "You were provoked. You were just standing your ground." Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Is this you on Twitter? Call me now." Catherine's stomach dropped. She turned the device face down, unable to confront it. Back in first class, Sophia Alvarez checked on Noah again. "Dinner service will begin soon. Would you like chicken or pasta?" Noah hesitated, then asked softly, "Do I have to decide now?" Sophia smiled. "Of course not. I'll come back. Take your time." Her patience was a balm. She knew this boy wasn't just choosing a meal, he was processing the kind of wound that lingered long after apologies or explanations. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, staring at the ceiling of the cabin. His mind churned with competing impulses. Part of him wanted to issue a swift corporate statement, to seize control of the narrative before misinformation spread. Another part of him wanted to let it play out, to let Catherine's behavior condemn itself without interference. And beneath both, The father in him wanted nothing more than to shield Noah from the glare of attention. But there was no shielding now. Already, he could imagine the headlines: CEO confronts racist passenger. Airline owner defends son. The world would feast on the drama. But would they understand the lesson? That was the question that haunted him. Noah shifted in his seat. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you say who you were right away? You could have stopped it before it got ugly. Malcolm's gaze softened. Because your worth doesn't come from my name. Noah. You belong here because you earned it. Because you're my son. Because you're a human being deserving of respect. If I had used my title right away, she might have backed down, but she wouldn't have learned anything. And more importantly, you wouldn't have learned that you could stand on your own. Noah let the words sink in. For the first time that night, he felt a flicker of pride, not just for surviving, but for standing. At the back of the plane, Catherine closed her eyes, but sleep refused her. Every whisper, every camera pointed her way, reminded her that she was no longer just a passenger. She was a pariah, a symbol of entitlement and prejudice. And the plane still had 3 more hours in the air. The engines hummed on, steady and indifferent, carrying with them a story already too large to contain. At 35,000 feet, time felt suspended. The plane cruised through dark skies, steady against the whisper of jet streams. But inside the cabin, a second storm gathered. It lived not in the clouds, but in the glow of smartphones. Catherine Voss had become a headline before the aircraft even reached cruising altitude. In first class, passengers scrolled feverishly. Victor Liang muttered under his breath as he tapped his screen. Unbelievable. They've already found her LinkedIn. He turned the phone toward Dr. Samira Kadir. On the screen was Catherine's professional photo, her title beneath it, marketing director at a mid-tier consultancy in Los Angeles. Her name trended alongside hashtags: Seat 2A, First Class Racism, Ellington Air. Samira exhaled slowly. The internet doesn't just expose anymore, it devours. She imagined Catherine sitting somewhere in economy, watching her carefully built life collapse one notification at a time. But her sympathy was thin. Catherine's words had not been careless mistakes. They had been deliberate knives, each thrust at a 12-year-old boy. Noah Ellington sat with his hands folded tight, his fingernails pressing crescents into his palms. He stared at the window, but saw nothing of the night sky. His reflection looked older, harder. He whispered, almost to himself, "I didn't ask for any of this." Malcolm leaned closer. "What do you mean, son? I wanted a trip with you. Just us. Just time together. Now I'm some video." His throat caught. "I just wanted to sit in my seat." The pain in his voice fractured Malcolm's composure. He had fought hostile takeovers, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, but he had never felt so powerless as when his son looked at him with eyes that begged for normalcy. "You're right," Malcolm admitted. "This should have been simple. A flight, a father-son trip. But sometimes life chooses us for bigger things than we're ready for." Noah shook his head. "But why me? Why do I have to be the lesson?" Silence stretched between them, heavy as gravity. Evelyn Monroe, listening from across the aisle, finally spoke. "Because history doesn't ask permission, child. It just happens. And sometimes it chooses people who never wanted to be chosen, but you're not alone in it. You have all of us watching, learning, and carrying the weight with you." Her words, cracked with age, yet fierce with conviction, steadied Noah more than his father's assurances had. He nodded faintly, pressing his forehead to the cool glass of the window. Meanwhile, in row 23, Catherine's phone vibrated until her hands shook. She finally dared to look. Text after text scrolled across the screen. Her colleagues, her boss, even her ex-husband. What did you do? You need to get ahead of this. You're trending worldwide. Her stomach turned as she opened Twitter. Her face filled the feed. A still frame captured the moment she leaned over Noah, finger pointed, lips curled in disdain. Beneath it, captions screamed, "This woman told a black child he didn't belong in first class." Another clip showed her scoffing, dismissing his father. The comments below were merciless. She fumbled with the tray table, dropping her bottled water in the process. The student beside her didn't move to help. He shifted his laptop further away, his body angled to create distance. Catherine whispered, "They don't understand. I didn't mean it that way." But even as she said it, she knew the words were hollow. She had meant every syllable in that moment, the entitlement, the superiority it had been hers. And now the world was holding up a mirror she could not escape. Up in first class. Malcolm's phone buzzed too. His assistant's name flashed across the screen, though they both knew airline Wi-Fi could be unstable. Still, the short text came through, "Press already calling. Crisis team ready. Statement draft by landing." Malcolm's jaw tightened. He hadn't wanted this trip to turn into business, but business had found him. If he stayed silent, critics would say Ellington Air was indifferent. If he spoke, they would accuse him of capitalizing on his son's pain. The dilemma was sharp: father or CEO protector or public figure. He reached for Noah's hand, grounding himself in the role that mattered most. Sofia Alvarez returned to check on them, her eyes scanning Noah with the practiced intuition of someone who had seen too many passengers unravel mid-flight. "Can I bring you dessert? We have ice cream in the galley." Noah almost said no, but something in her voice, the gentle normalcy of it, made him nod. "Yes, please." She smiled, coming right up. It was a small mercy, a reminder that childhood deserved sweetness even in the middle of storms. As she walked back, Victor spoke to Malcolm in a low voice. "You know the fallout will be massive. This isn't just about your son or Catherine. This is about every company, every airline, every executive who pretends bias doesn't happen at 30,000 feet. "I know," Malcolm replied. His voice was measured, but his eyes betrayed the calculation already at work. "And that's why I can't rush. One wrong word, and the focus shifts away from what really matters." Victor nodded, understanding the balancing act of power and principle. Meanwhile, Catherine's world shrank further. Her boss's email appeared, subject line in bold, "We need to discuss immediately." She imagined the boardroom where she had once strutted in heels, commanding respect. Tomorrow, she would be a liability, a PR nightmare. She tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. Her eyes darted toward the front of the plane, where Noah and Malcolm sat. Rage flickered again, rage at being exposed, at being ruined, but beneath it pulsed a quieter truth. Shame. Noah, finishing his ice cream, caught her glance when he stretched to the aisle. Their eyes met for half a second. Catherine looked away first. The plane hummed on, a capsule hurtling through night and consequence. Within its walls, reputations crumbled, innocence hardened, and justice, swift and merciless, spread across the globe at Wi-Fi speed. By the time they landed, nothing would be the same. The captain's voice broke through the steady hum of engines. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into New York. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." His words carried the calm authority of routine, but nothing about this landing would feel routine for those on board. In row 23, Catherine Voss gripped her armrest so tightly her knuckles paled. She felt dozens of eyes flick toward her, some with curiosity, others with disdain. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, as if fabric could shield her from recognition. But whispers traveled faster than air currents. Passengers in economy had already seen the trending clips. Some turned their phones toward her, subtle but unmistakable. She wanted to vanish, dissolve into the seat cushion, anything to escape the judgment she felt pressing down from every angle. In first class, Noah Ellington shifted uneasily. The descent made his ears pop, but it was the anticipation that weighed on him most. He had overheard Victor Liang mention that news crews might already be waiting at the gate. The thought of cameras flashing in his face churned his stomach. He leaned toward his father. "Do we have to go through them?" Malcolm studied his son's anxious expression. He wanted to say no, that they could slip out a side door, shield themselves from the glare. But avoidance was not an option. Once the story reached the ground, the world would demand their presence, their words, their dignity. "We'll walk together," Malcolm said quietly. "Head high, no matter what. Remember, you did nothing wrong." Noah nodded, though his hands fidgeted against the seatbelt. He imagined microphones shoved toward him, strangers shouting questions. How could he answer when all he had wanted was to sit beside his dad? Evelyn Monroe leaned forward from behind them, her voice soft but firm. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Noah. It's walking through it anyway. You've already shown courage today. Now it's time to carry it a little further." Her words gave Noah a fragile kind of strength, like a lantern flickering in darkness. As the city lights glittered below, Catherine scrolled through her phone one last time. The clips had reached millions of views. Her name blazed across headlines: "Passenger attempts to take child seat. Confronts airline owner." She saw her employer's official statement already circulating. "We do not condone discriminatory behavior and are reviewing the matter internally." The phrasing was icy, corporate, and damning. She pressed her phone against her chest, trying to slow her breathing. Life as she knew it was unraveling with every refresh. The wheels touched down with a heavy jolt. Passengers jolted forward, then back as the engines roared. Applause broke out in the rear of the cabin, the way it sometimes did when relief outweighed formality. But for Catherine, there was no relief, only dread. When the plane rolled to the gate, the flight attendants prepared the cabin. Sophia Alvarez glanced at Malcolm and Noah, her eyes kind but purposeful. "Security is meeting us at the door. They'll help escort you through." Malcolm inclined his head in gratitude. He knew the attention wouldn't fade soon, but at least someone was thinking about Noah's protection. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers rose, pulling bags from overhead bins. The normal chaos of landing mingled with the tension of anticipation. Dozens of phones remained raised, recording the Ellingtons as if history was unfolding in real time. Catherine stayed seated, frozen. She wanted to sprint off the plane before anyone noticed her, but she also feared being filmed rushing like a guilty fugitive. Her only choice was to follow the line, endure the whispers, and pray the cameras outside weren't focused solely on her. At the front of the plane, Captain Marcus Leone stepped into the cabin. His tall frame carried both authority and contrition. He approached Malcolm. "Mr. Ellington, I want to personally apologize on behalf of the crew. This flight should have been a celebration for you and your son, not an ordeal." Malcolm shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Captain. I know this isn't easy, but what matters now is how we respond." The captain nodded, his expression serious. "Security is waiting beyond the jet bridge. The press is already gathered. We'll escort you through safely." Noah's pulse raced as he stood. The aisle stretched before him like a gauntlet. Passengers shifted aside, some murmuring encouragement, others simply staring. Evelyn gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze as he passed. Victor Liang and Dr. Samira Kadir offered nods of solidarity. Step by step, Noah walked beside his father, every gaze magnified by the knowledge that millions more would watch through screens. The cabin door opened. Flashbulbs erupted instantly, a storm of white light against the sterile brightness of the jet bridge. Reporters shouted questions, their voices clashing in a wall of noise. "Mr. Ellington, how do you respond? Noah, how did it feel? Catherine, do you regret your actions?" Noah flinched at the chaos. Malcolm's arm settled protectively around his shoulders, guiding him forward with steady assurance. Security officers formed a barrier, holding back the surge of cameras. Catherine emerged behind them moments later, her head bowed, oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes, though they fooled no one. The crowd recognized her instantly. A wave of boos and harsh words rose from the onlookers. "Shame on you! How dare you treat a child that way!" The sound hit her like stones. She clutched her bag close, moving quickly, her face drained of color. For Noah, the moment blurred into fragments, the crush of voices, the flashing bulbs, his father's steady grip. He tried to focus on breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. He wondered if anyone saw him as a boy anymore, or only as a headline. Malcolm stopped briefly before the microphones, his voice even deliberate. "Tonight my son experienced something no child should endure. Discrimination has no place in our world, not at 30,000 feet, not anywhere. We will address this matter fully. But for now, my priority is my son's well-being. That is all." He guided Noah forward before more questions could follow. It was a statement of both restraint and conviction, carefully crafted in seconds. Reporters clamored for more, but Malcolm would not give it, not yet. Behind them, Catherine tried to slip through unnoticed, but the cameras turned on her like predators scenting blood. She quickened her pace, nearly running, but the shouts followed. "Do you want to apologize? Are you worried about losing your job?" Her silence only fueled the spectacle. As the Ellingtons reached their car service, Noah collapsed into the leather seat with a long breath. He pressed his forehead to the window again, watching the swarm outside. "It's too much," he whispered. Malcolm placed a hand over his son's. "I know. But remember, storms pass. What lasts is who we are in them." The car pulled away from the terminal, leaving behind the chaos of flashing lights and shouted questions. But the storm outside was only beginning to mirror the storm online. The black sedan glided through New York traffic, its tinted windows shutting out the noise of reporters still camped outside the terminal. Inside, Noah leaned against his father's shoulder, his eyelids heavy but his mind too restless for sleep. The city's neon lights flickered across his face, each flash a reminder of the cameras that had chased them only minutes earlier. Malcolm smoothed a hand over his son's hair, a gesture more for himself than for Noah. The boy had been strong, too strong for his age. Malcolm's heart ached at the thought. Childhood should have been about adventures, laughter, and curiosity. Yet, tonight, Noah had carried the weight of a world's prejudice on his small shoulders. When they reached the hotel, security ushered them through a side entrance. The lobby buzzed with energy, though most guests had no idea that the two figures slipping inside were already the center of a global storm. Upstairs, the suite was quiet. The city's roar softened into a low hum beyond the windows. Noah dropped onto the couch, burying his face into a pillow. "Dad, why can't they just leave us alone?" His voice was muffled but heavy with exhaustion. Malcolm sat beside him, choosing his words carefully. "Because, Noah, what happened to you today matters to more people than we can imagine. They see themselves in your struggle. They see injustice they've faced, too. That's why it's spreading so fast." I didn't want to be anyone's symbol, Noah muttered. I know, Malcolm whispered. He reached for his son's hand. You don't have to carry everyone's expectations. You just have to be yourself. That's enough. A knock sounded at the door. Malcolm opened it to find his head of communications, Adrian Cole, already suited despite the late hour. Adrian's expression was taut with urgency. The story's out of control, he said, setting his laptop on the table. Major outlets have picked it up. CNN, BBC, even Al Jazeera. They're all running with it. We need to decide on a unified response before morning. Malcolm sighed. He had known this was coming, but facing it so soon after the chaos felt like whiplash. And Catherine Adrian tapped the keyboard, pulling up fresh reports. Her company suspended her within the hour. They've issued a statement distancing themselves. Social media has her address circulating. She's trending #1 worldwide. Noah lifted his head slightly at the mention of her name. For a brief moment, he imagined Catherine alone in some dark apartment, scrolling through the avalanche of hate. The thought didn't stir satisfaction, only a strange hollow ache. Dad, Noah asked softly, is it okay that people are attacking her now? She was wrong, but it feels scary. What's happening? Malcolm paused, recognizing the complexity of his son's heart. It's not okay for the world to destroy a person, even when they've done harm. Accountability matters, but so does mercy. The internet doesn't always understand the difference. Noah nodded slowly, though he still looked troubled. Adrian cleared his throat. We can't control the mob, but we can set a standard. The public will expect Ellington Air to take action. They'll look to you, Malcolm, not just as a CEO, but as a father. Malcolm rubbed his temples. Draft me something for tomorrow, but tonight, my priority is him. He glanced toward Noah, who had curled back into the pillow, half asleep, but still listening. In another part of the city, Catherine Voss sat on the edge of her bed, her laptop glowing in the dark. Her inbox overflowed with messages, most unread. One from her boss stood out, cold and final. Your actions on Flight 827 have placed the firm at risk. We are terminating your contract effective immediately. She let out a strangled laugh, half disbelief, half despair. Her phone buzzed again, hundreds of notifications, each one another nail in her coffin. She scrolled through Twitter, her name plastered across memes, hashtags, and furious threads. Some demanded she be banned from flying forever. Others dug into her past, pulling photos, comments, even old high school yearbook quotes. Her entire life was becoming public property. Catherine closed the laptop and buried her face in her hands. For the first time, the mask of superiority slipped, leaving behind only a woman cornered by the consequences of her own arrogance. Back at the hotel, Malcolm poured himself a glass of water, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The city glittered with promise and ruthlessness alike. He felt both forces pressing against him tonight. Tomorrow, boardrooms and headlines would demand his response. But in the quiet of the suite, all that mattered was the boy asleep on the couch. He turned, watching Noah's small frame rise and fall with each breath. His chest tightened with both pride and sorrow. Pride that Noah had shown resilience beyond his years. Sorrow that the world had stolen a piece of his innocence. Malcolm whispered to the window, as if confessing to the night itself. I built an empire to shield him from this, but even I can't buy him safety from hatred. He knew tomorrow would be war against public scrutiny, against corporate cowardice, against the tide of cynicism that dismissed moments like these as mere spectacles. He would need strategy, allies, and resolve. But for tonight, he allowed himself to be just a father in the quiet, standing guard over the boy who was both his greatest joy and his greatest responsibility. The sweet phone rang, startling the silence. Adrian answered quickly, his voice sharp. Yes, understood. He covered the receiver, looking at Malcolm. CNN wants you live at 8 a.m. They're framing this as a test for corporate America. They're calling Noah the boy in seat 2A. Noah stirred slightly at the sound, his eyes fluttering open. Seat 2A, he whispered. That's all I'll be to them now. Malcolm crouched beside him, his hand resting gently on Noah's shoulder. No, you are Noah Ellington. Don't ever forget that. To me, to your family. You're not a headline. You're my son. Noah's eyes closed again, and within moments he drifted back into sleep. Malcolm rose slowly, his gaze hardening as he looked once more toward the skyline. The night had given him clarity. Tomorrow, he would not just defend his son, he would demand change. Dawn slipped through the curtains of the hotel suite, painting the walls in pale gold. The city outside stirred to life, horns echoing in the distance, delivery trucks rumbling along the avenues. Inside, Noah Ellington lay half awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had come in broken fragments, chased away by flashes of cameras and the roar of questions shouted at him the night before. Across the room, Malcolm adjusted his tie in the mirror. He had been awake since 5, his mind sharpened by necessity. At 8 o'clock sharp he would appear on national television, not as a CEO protecting a company, but as a father standing for his son. Yet the lines between the two blurred no matter how much he tried to separate them. Do you have to go? Noah asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken fears. Malcolm turned, kneeling so they were eye level. I do, son. People are watching, and they need to hear the truth. But remember this, no one can tell your story better than you already did when you stood your ground. I'm only building on what you began. Noah nodded, though his chest still felt heavy. He wanted to believe his father's words, but the idea of the world dissecting his pain made him curl deeper into the blanket. Adrian Cole knocked lightly before entering. His laptop glowed with updates, his tone brisk. The networks are lined up. CNN first, then CBS, then a sit-down with the Times later this afternoon. The narrative is already shifting. Commentators are calling this a turning point in corporate accountability. Malcolm gave a short nod. Let them. But the focus has to stay on dignity, not scandal. Make sure the producers know that. As the car whisked them through morning traffic, Malcolm rehearsed nothing. His words would come not from strategy, but from conviction. Yet even conviction carried risk. One slip, one poorly chosen phrase, and critics would accuse him of exploiting his son's trauma for brand positioning. The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. Truth, simply told, would have to be enough. Back in the hotel, Noah sat with Evelyn Monroe, who had insisted on accompanying them after the flight. She poured him a glass of orange juice, her hands steady despite her age. Your father will speak well, she assured him, but never forget. Noah, you've already spoken louder than any broadcast could. You showed the world who you are. Noah looked down into the glass. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. Symbols rarely get to choose, Evelyn said gently. But you are not only a symbol, you're a boy with dreams, fears, and joys that no camera can capture. Don't let them take that away from you. Noah met her eyes, surprised at the firmness behind her smile. Something about her presence steadied him, as though she were a bridge between generations, holding him up where the world tried to weigh him down. Across the city, in a dim apartment, Catherine Voss woke to the buzz of her phone vibrating across the nightstand. Her head throbbed, her mouth dry. She reached for the device, blinking against the harsh light of dozens of notifications. Headlines filled the screen. Marketing executive fired after viral plane confrontation. Catherine Voss face of first-class racism. She stumbled into the bathroom, splashing water on her face, but the mirror reflected only exhaustion and dread. The scarf she had clung to on the plane lay crumpled on the floor, useless now as armor. For years she had built her identity around superiority, the certainty that she belonged above others. Now, stripped of her job and her reputation, she was left with nothing but the bitter truth of her own actions. Catherine sat at the edge of the tub, clutching the phone to her chest. She thought of calling her sister, of begging for understanding, but shame sealed her throat. Every message she had received since last night carried the same tone: anger, disappointment, disgust. The internet had named her villain, and she saw no path to redemption. At precisely 8 o'clock, the red light on the camera flicked on in a Manhattan studio. Malcolm Ellington sat tall, his expression calm but resolute. The anchor's voice was measured, professional, but tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Ellington, the world has seen the video of what happened to your son on Flight 827. As both a father and the head of Ellington Air, how do you respond?" Malcolm inhaled slowly, his eyes steady on the lens. What happened last night should never happen to any child, anywhere. My son purchased a ticket, sat in his assigned seat, and was told he didn't belong because of how he looked. That is unacceptable. It is not just a customer service failure, it is a moral failure. The anchor leaned forward. Some say this incident is about one passenger's prejudice. Others argue it exposes deeper systemic issues in travel and beyond. "Which is it, both?" Malcolm replied. His voice carried weight, deliberate and unwavering. Yes, one woman expressed prejudice, but the silence that initially surrounded my son before the truth was revealed that is systemic. Too often, dignity depends on status or recognition. My son deserved respect as a human being, not because of my title. Until we build systems that ensure dignity for everyone, these stories will repeat. Back at the hotel, Noah watched the broadcast on a muted television. His chest swelled at his father's words, though part of him still wished none of it had been necessary. Evelyn rested a hand on his shoulder. "See, he's speaking for you, but also for millions who've lived this in silence," Noah whispered. "It feels like too much." "It is too much," Evelyn admitted, "but sometimes too much is exactly what changes the world." In the studio, the anchor pressed further. What steps will Ellington Air take in response? Malcolm didn't hesitate. "We are implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, expanding our scholarship program for underrepresented youth in aviation, and introducing an independent oversight panel to handle discrimination complaints." But let me be clear, this is not about corporate image. This is about accountability. My son should not need my name to be treated with dignity, and neither should anyone else. The interview ended with a swell of applause from viewers in the control room. Malcolm removed his microphone, his expression steady but his heart pounding. He knew the impact of his words would ripple far beyond this studio, into boardrooms, legislatures, and households across the nation. By midday, Noah's face had already appeared on morning shows, headlines dubbing him the boy in seat 2A. At the hotel, he turned away from the screen, curling against the couch cushion. He whispered to himself, "I'm Noah, not seat 2A." Evelyn heard him and nodded solemnly. "Yes, you are. Never let them forget it." Across town, Catherine scrolled through the interview, her stomach twisting. Each word from Malcolm was a mirror reflecting her cruelty. She slammed the laptop shut, but the echo of his voice, lingered. Dignity should never depend on status. For the first time, the shield of denial cracked, and she felt the sting of truth she could not outrun. In the hotel suite, Malcolm returned hours later, weary but resolute. Noah looked up at him, questions brimming in his eyes. Malcolm sat beside him, pulling him close. "It's begun," he said softly. "The fight for something bigger than us. But remember, Noah, no matter what the world says, you are not just part of a movement. You are my son, and nothing will ever matter more than that." Noah rested his head against his father's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in days, he felt safe. The morning after Malcolm's interview, the country woke buzzing. The story had leapt beyond news broadcasts and social media timelines. It had become a cultural lightning bolt, igniting debates about privilege, accountability, and the invisible barriers still woven into everyday life. In Washington, lawmakers called for hearings on discrimination in air travel. Headlines splashed across digital front pages. Congress to question airlines after viral racism incident. Within hours, Malcolm's office received calls from staffers on both sides of the aisle, inviting him to testify in front of the Transportation Committee. He declined, at least for now. He needed time to breathe, to shield Noah from the political spectacle forming around them. Yet, even as he tried to pause, the gears of public life spun without mercy. Industry leaders demanded emergency meetings. Stockholders wanted reassurance. Allies encouraged him to seize the moment as leverage for broader reforms. Critics accused him of turning his son's pain into corporate marketing. The noise swelled louder each hour. Meanwhile, Noah faced a different world entirely. On Monday morning, he walked back into school, his backpack heavy, his steps hesitant. The halls were no longer familiar. Students stared, whispered, and pointed as he passed. Some smiled shyly. Others looked at him with curiosity that felt invasive. A few clapped softly as though he had won a medal. Noah wished the floor would swallow him whole. In English class, his teacher paused to welcome him back. "We're proud of how you handled yourself, Noah," she said warmly. The entire room turned toward him, eyes filled with expectation. He nodded quickly, burying himself in his notebook, pride and suffocation twisted together in his chest. He hadn't asked to be anyone's example. At lunch, his closest friend, Malik, slid into the seat beside him. "Dude, you're everywhere," my mom cried watching the interview. "Said you're a hero." Noah poked at his sandwich. "I don't feel like a hero. I just wanted to sit in my seat." Malik tilted his head. "Maybe that's why people call it heroic, because you didn't back down when someone tried to erase you." The words landed, though Noah wasn't sure how to carry them. Being admired felt almost as heavy as being insulted. Across town, Catherine Voss stared at her darkened phone. She hadn't dared open social media since yesterday. Her employer's termination letter sat on the counter, a cold reminder that her comfortable life had been upended in a matter of hours. The bills on her desk suddenly looked taller. The friend she once bragged to hadn't returned her calls. For the first time, Catherine felt the sharp edges of consequences, yet her pride still clung to excuses. She told herself she had been misunderstood, that the cameras had caught only fragments, that perhaps this punishment had gone too far. But late at night, when the noise quieted, another voice whispered inside her, "You humiliated a child. You told him he didn't belong. That is the truth you cannot erase." The thought gnawed at her, fragile but insistent. She reached for a pen, staring at a blank page. Words formed hesitantly to the boy in seat 2A. She stopped, hand trembling. She wasn't ready to finish the letter, but for the first time, she admitted she might need to try. Back at Ellington Air headquarters, Malcolm sat in the boardroom surrounded by executives and advisors. The atmosphere pulsed with tension. Victor Liang, his longtime CFO, leaned forward. The stock is stabilizing, but investors want assurance.
They're asking how far you intend to take this. They worry about litigation, regulation, costs. Malcolm clasped his hands, his gaze steady. They should worry about something bigger. If customers believe we tolerate discrimination, no profit margin will save us. We lead this industry. If we don't take bold steps, no one will. Another executive shifted uncomfortably. There's talk of boycotts from certain groups. Some say you're politicizing the company. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Dignity isn't political. It's human. And if that makes us controversial, so be it. Victor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we prepare for turbulence. But if anyone can steer through it, it's you. That evening, Noah sat with his father in the quiet of their living room. The world outside roared with headlines, but here the air hummed with only the faint tick of a clock. "Dad," Noah asked suddenly, "what if this never ends? What if people always look at me like I'm just the kid from the video?" Malcolm considered carefully before answering. "Then you show them who you are beyond the video. You show them your love for basketball, your curiosity for science, your kindness to your friends. You show them Noah, not just seat 2A. Noah leaned against him, silent but comforted. Across the city, Catherine folded the half-written letter and tucked it into a drawer. She wasn't ready to send it, but the act of writing had cracked something open inside her. For the first time, she admitted that maybe her downfall wasn't just misfortune. Maybe it was a mirror, forcing her to confront the ugliness she had hidden behind polished clothes and entitled words. The ripple effect of one confrontation on an airplane had spread outward through homes, schools, boardrooms, and political chambers. What began as a stolen seat had become a question echoing across a nation: who belongs and who decides. As Malcolm prepared for the hearings now looming on the horizon, and as Noah tried to carve out a normal life in the shadow of unwanted fame, Catherine sat alone in her apartment, staring at the folded page. Somewhere deep inside her, remorse stirred like an ember, small and uncertain, but alive. The story was far from over. The grand chamber of the House Transportation Committee was packed with reporters, flashing cameras, and the weight of history. Rows of polished wood desks stretched before a semicircle of lawmakers, their faces a mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and political calculation. On the witness table sat Malcolm Ellington, calm in a tailored gray suit, his son Noah just behind him. The world had followed them here, and the air felt charged with expectation. A congresswoman adjusted her glasses, leaning into her microphone. "Mr. Ellington, thank you for appearing. Millions have seen the footage of the incident aboard Flight 601. They have also heard the aftermath. This hearing asks one central question: what should accountability look like when discrimination takes place in the skies?" Malcolm paused, his voice steady when it came. "Accountability begins with honesty. My son was not just denied a seat. He was denied dignity. Every passenger deserves respect, regardless of race, age, or wealth. The problem is not one woman. The problem is the culture that allowed her assumptions to feel natural." The room hushed. Cameras clicked. Noah sat straighter, proud yet nervous, his heart pounding at the thought of his father's words echoing across the nation. Another lawmaker leaned forward. "Some critics say you are using this tragedy to promote your airline brand. How do you respond?" Malcolm's gaze did not waver.
If standing for my child's dignity is a marketing ploy, then may every company in America embrace such ploys. This is not about profit. It is about principle. Our industry controls the skies, but we cannot soar if we chain people to prejudice. Applause rippled through the audience. The chairman banged his gavel lightly, but even he struggled to conceal a nod of approval. Later, outside on the Capitol steps, Noah faced a wall of microphones. Reporters shouted questions. A voice called, "Noah, what do you want other kids to learn from what happened?" Noah hesitated, his palms sweating, then answered softly, "That they belong. Wherever their ticket says, wherever their dreams lead them, they belong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The clip traveled faster than any press release. In classrooms, teachers replayed his words as a lesson in courage. On playgrounds, children repeated them like a chant. Across the country, Catherine Voss watched from the small television in her apartment. Her folded letter lay on the coffee table, untouched for days. Seeing Noah's face, hearing his voice steady, brave, too wise for his years, broke something in her defenses. Tears welled, unexpected and raw. She reached for the letter, smoothing its creased edges, then began to write again. To Noah Ellington. She scribbled, her hand shaking. "I cannot undo the pain I caused you. I cannot take back the words I said. They came from ignorance, arrogance, and fear. But I see now that they revealed far more about me than about you. I am sorry. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. You showed the world what dignity looks like. I showed the world what cruelty looks like. If I can ask anything, it is not forgiveness, but that I learn to live differently from this day forward." For the first time in weeks, Catherine felt a sliver of peace. Whether the boy ever read her words did not matter as much as her choice to face the truth. Back at headquarters, Victor Liang slid a folder across the table. "The Hailstone Initiative," he said with a thin smile.
Training programs, monitoring technology, scholarship fund, public commitments, everything is ready. Malcolm scanned the pages. The plan was ambitious mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, AI systems to monitor interactions for misconduct, a multi-million-dollar scholarship fund for underrepresented students in aviation. It was bold, expensive, controversial. But as he closed the folder, he knew it was necessary. "Let's launch it." Malcolm said simply, "No more delays. This is how we change the industry." Noah sat in his father's office that evening, curled on the leather sofa with his homework. "Dad," he asked, "will people forget about all this?" One day, Malcolm considered, they may forget the headlines, but they won't forget how it made them feel. And you will carry the strength you discovered forever. That's what matters. At school, life slowly shifted. The stares grew less intense. The whispers faded. Some students approached with genuine curiosity. "What was it like?" they asked. Noah answered politely, but he never boasted. In time, they began to see him not as a viral symbol, but as the boy they had always known, funny, thoughtful, eager to shoot hoops after class. For Catherine, the road was steeper. She found work again, not in a glossy marketing firm, but in a nonprofit community center. The pay was modest, the hours long, yet each day she stood before a group of children from backgrounds unlike hers. Children who reminded her of the boy she had tried to diminish. She taught them about communication, about respect, about mistakes. She never spoke of her own shame directly, but it hovered like a silent teacher in the room. Slowly, piece by piece, she began to rebuild. 6 months later, in a New York hotel ballroom filled with industry leaders, Malcolm addressed an aviation conference. Noah stood at the edge of the stage, watching proudly.
Flying is more than physics, Malcolm declared to the packed hall. It is trust. When passengers step onto a plane, they entrust us with their safety, their comfort, and their dignity. Break that trust, and we fall. Honor it, and we rise together. The skies must belong to everyone. The audience rose in thunderous applause. Noah's chest swelled with pride. As father and son walked out of the ballroom into the cool night air, Noah whispered, "Dad, I think I get it now. Strength isn't about being the loudest. It's about being steady, even when people try to shake you." Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. "Exactly, son. You held steady, and that's why the world listened." The city lights shimmered above them, aircraft blinking across the sky. Somewhere, another flight carried passengers of every background, every story. Among them might be a child who looked at C2A and believed he belonged there because once a boy named Noah proved that he did. And Catherine, watching from afar, folded her finished letter into an envelope, uncertain if she would ever send it, but grateful that a boy's dignity had awakened her own humanity. The reckoning was not just for one woman, one family, or one airline. It was for everyone. Because prejudice thrives in silence, but dignity takes flight when spoken aloud. The story of Noah and Malcolm Ellington leaves us with more than outrage. It leaves us with a mirror, a reminder that prejudice, when left unchecked, robs children of innocence and communities of trust. Yet it also shows us the power of dignity, the strength of calm resistance, and the possibility of redemption even for those who once caused harm. We watched a boy face cruelty and stand his ground. We saw a father use his power not for revenge, but for change. And we even glimpsed the beginning of remorse in a woman forced to confront her own arrogance. This story is a call to each of us.
To speak up when silence feels easier, to honor the humanity in strangers, to ensure no child ever hears the words, "You don't belong." If this story moved you, if it made you feel anger, compassion, or hope, don't let it fade. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel, because there are more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, and together, we can keep the conversation alive. The skies should belong to everyone, and so should dignity.